Americans living during the Great Depression experienced a tremendous loss and were thrown into poverty and despair. Life savings vanished with the crash of the stock market, leaving 1 out of every 4 workers unemployed and the country in a hopeless state. The Depression affected all Americans. The desperate nation turned to the federal government for help. The government's response was provided in the form of the New Deal, a massive economic plan of relief, recovery, and reform. One New Deal program became the largest and most influential of the recovery programs, the Works Progress Administration. This massive program successfully brought work to millions of Americans through the vision of its leader and creator, Harry Hopkins. Harry Hopkins was born in Iowa in 1890 as the son of a harness maker and traveling salesman. As a youth, Hopkins was influenced by the rags to riches mindset of the social gospel. After graduating from Grinnell College in 1912, Hopkins moved to New York and established himself as a prominent social worker. Hopkins was not motivated by financial gain or conquest of political superiority, but rather the good that he could do for those in need. After the stock market crash of 1929, Harry Hopkins became the executive director for the Temporary Emergency Relief Administration for the state of New York, where he developed a vision for relief he shared with the governor at the time, Franklin Roosevelt. After the election of President Roosevelt in 1932, Hopkins was selected to head 2 of the programs in the first wave of the New Deal, the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, which distributed financial aid, and later, the Civil Works Administration, which provided temporary jobs to the unemployed and served as a precursor to the WPA. Despite the success of the legislation passed in the first 100 days of the New Deal, America was still suffering. One of the most critical issues was the skyrocketing unemployment rate. With Hopkins' influence in Washington expanding, the nation was ready for a new wave of programs, and Hopkins was in a position in which he could present his ideas and establish programs of his own. He advocated an approach that differed from traditional relief. He believed that simply handing out money was degrading. Instead, he promoted the approach in which the federal government would supply jobs to the unemployed. After the sweeping victory of the Democrats in the midterm election of 1934, Harry Hopkins was provided an opportunity to present a plan of massive public works to Roosevelt. FDR made the political decision to go ahead with Hopkins' program, so on January 4, 1935, the new plan was presented to the nation. The Works Progress Administration, or WPA, was established by the Emergency Relief Appropriation Act of 1935 and Roosevelt's executive order. Harry Hopkins was appointed head of the newly created Works Progress Administration, which aimed to provide jobs for the unemployed. This massive system created a centralized and direct federal works program. WPA workers were paid directly from the United States Treasury. Projects were also administered locally to suit the needs of the community while providing employment across the nation. The new approach of the Works Progress Administration fully reflected the views of Harry Hopkins. Hopkins argued eloquently that a works program was best for the American people. However, what was truly innovative was his revolutionary approach to employment. He was a strong believer that people's unique skills should not go to waste, and instead they should use the skills that they had worked so hard to obtain. Hopkins emphasized that his goals for the WPA were social, not material. Work relief cost more than direct relief, but Hopkins believed the cost was justified. First, in the saving of morale, second, in the preservation of human skills and talents, and third, in the material enrichments which the unemployed added to the national wealth through their labors. He once observed, "Give a man a dole, and you save his body and destroy his spirit. Give him a job, and you save both his body and spirit." The majority of WPA employees worked on construction projects for the unskilled. Such building projects included the highway, road, and streets projects, public building projects, emergency flood and drought relief, sewer system and other utility projects, and conservation projects, just to name a few. The WPA also created public parks and recreational facilities, airports, and schools. The execution of these programs relied heavily on local governments as well. Harry Hopkins designed the WPA so that these building projects spent most of its funds paying workers and less on materials. Nonetheless, Americans everywhere benefited from the countless WPA contributions. Harry Hopkins also extended WPA relief to unemployed artists, writers, and musicians through the Federal Project No. 1, or Federal One. The Federal One became a key component of the WPA, and perhaps the most revolutionary as well as controversial. It became the largest of the New Deal cultural programs, employing over 40,000 writers, artists, actors, and musicians in the first year alone. This groundbreaking federal support for the arts created by Hopkins benefited both WPA employees under the Federal One as well as the American public, who could enjoy the cultural enrichment and entertainment the artists, musicians, and writers provided. Artists could express their thoughts in difficult times through powerful mediums, while still being able to support themselves and their families. The arts also became easily accessible to the American public. Harry Hopkins established a new appreciation and respect for the arts through the Federal One. The program also preserved the talent of skilled artists such as Jackson Pollock. Other projects as well retained tremendous significance, such as the Oral History Archives, which provide invaluable first-hand accounts of slavery. However, the Federal One was met with harsh opposition from New Deal critics, who viewed the programs as a waste of federal dollars on trivial projects. Conservatives found government spending on infrastructural improvements more tolerable than the endorsement of Federal One programs. Despite the harsh criticism, Hopkins stood by his programs. The head of the Federal Theater Project, Hallie Flanagan, once recalled, Hopkins decided unemployed theater professionals and their fellow musicians, painters, and writers could get as hungry as unemployed engineers. He further decided, and this was much more revolutionary, that their skills were worthy of conservation. The enormous spending and distribution of money through the WPA was a major target of criticism. Harry Hopkins was infuriated by these attacks on his programs. No matter what action he took, critics were quick to respond. He once admitted, "You can't care very much what people are going to say, because when you're handling other people's money, whatever you do is always wrong." Hopkins worked endlessly in order to provide relief to those in dire need of it. He allied himself with powerful politicians in support of his work, especially his trusted friend whom he was most loyal, FDR. Harry Hopkins had successfully established and maintained his massive works program. As the U.S. entered World War II, war production activities accelerated and the industries began to absorb the unemployed. With the wide availability of factory jobs, the WPA was no longer needed. In December of 1943, the President ordered the liquidation of the WPA, and by June 30th, 1943, the Works Progress Administration ceased operations. Within the 8 years of operations, the Works Progress Administration employed a total of 8.5 million workers on about 1.4 million projects, spending $11 billion. The building projects constructed, murals painted, schools built, books written, and bridges made remain as reminders of the immense impact the WPA had on America. To this day, almost every community contains a product of the WPA. In addition to the incredible material gain and employment, the WPA had great social achievements as well. Despite the enormous spending, a price cannot be put on the lives changed and saved by the employment through the WPA. The WPA was not only the largest New Deal program, but it also was the largest administrative undertaking in peacetime history of the American government. Harry Hopkins' radical work impacted an entire nation. Harry Hopkins committed his life to helping those in need, while displaying tremendous creative political leadership and determination, which sustained the nation through one of the most difficult times in American history.